Levine Institute for Holocaust Education. It's my honor to welcome to the Bima Dr. Lindsay MacNeill.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really my honor to be here with you all today. I'm going to be talking tonight about how the Holocaust Museum memorializes the shtetl of Aishashuk and how that has changed from the 20th to the 21st century. What I'm talking about tomorrow is a little bit more about the history. Do I need to be closer to a mic? Yeah. They come together. Okay. I'm going to be talking Monday a little bit more about the history of the shtetl and do a little bit more of the act of memorializing tomorrow. So today I'm going to talk a little bit more about the museum as a whole. At the end, I'm happy to answer any questions you have about what I talked about today or just about the Holocaust in general. This is what I like to talk about, so you can ask me really anything that you're interested in. I'm happy to answer your questions. Before I start, how many of you have been to the Holocaust Museum in DC? Okay, a few. Do any of you remember an exhibit called the Tower of Faces? Some nods, yeah. Okay, so it's one of our more memorable exhibits. I'm going to skip there. It looks like this. It is a 3-story tower covered in photographs. There are about 1,000 photographs. I think it's 1,032 on a 54-foot high tower. This is one of the few exhibits in our exhibition that covers more than one floor that visitors experience twice. And it was very important to the creators of our museum because, as you probably know, one of the really difficult things in teaching about or communicating about the Holocaust is this contrast between scale and personhood, right? That you want to capture how huge of a crime this was, how many people were murdered, try to picture this number 6 million. But you also want to remember people as individuals, people who lived full lives, happy lives, maybe sad lives, right? People who were nice, people who were mean, right? People who were murdered just because they were Jewish. And you want to try to find a way to make sure a visitor to the museum understands both of those things. And the tower, as we like to call it, is supposed to really put a face to 6 million. And it's kind of doing both. I think you can see a bit of tension here between both the individual and the scale. The tower was created by a woman named Yafa Iliach. She herself was a survivor of the shtetl of Aishashuk. All of the photographs that you see in the tower are actually from Aishashuk, which was a town of between 2,000 and 3,000 people, and it was majority Jewish. Yafa Iliach, who you can see here as an adult in the tower and then as a young child in Aishashuk, survived. Most of her town, most of her family did not. As an adult, she became part of the Holocaust Museum's council and was working on creating the exhibition space. And one of the things that she describes becoming sort of consumed with was finding a way to create a memorial, which she calls not to death, but to life, to sort of recreate for herself, for her community, the place that she was from, that she lived the first few years of her life, where her family had lived for generations. And so she traveled the world. She started with the few family photographs that she and her brother had in their collection, and then sought out other survivors from Aishashuk to see what photographs they had. Families who had emigrated from Aishashuk, who had been sent photographs of the town. She found some that had been buried in Israel by someone who had emigrated from the town. She found some from a granddaughter who had gone back to visit her grandparents and taken a bunch of photographs. Her grandmother, Yafa's, was one of the town photographers. So she had this like very special relationship with photography in general. She has a lot of photographs of herself. If you have been to the museum, this is probably one of the things that you remember. When visitors leave the exhibit, they talk about seeing the shoes and the Tower of Faces as things that really impacted them. And 90% of our visitors are not Jewish. Most of them probably didn't know and don't know even after going through the exhibit what a shtetl is, right? They have no real concept that that is what they have seen here, right? That this is a small Jewish town, right? That this was not just one place, but a phenomenon that existed more broadly in Europe. But they walk away remembering the photographs, remembering the people. And I remember on my first visit being so struck by how modern some of the pictures are. I'm going to show a lot more of them tomorrow, so I'm not going to show too many tonight. But there's one with Mickey Mouse. There's a lot of bicycles. There's weddings and birthday parties and bar mitzvahs and kind of silly portraits and like, oh, the local orchestra is taking its annual photograph, or, you know, the elementary school class, that type of thing, are all documented in the tower. Since the museum opened in 1993, we have had 49 million visitors. So some years more than others, but it's kind of about 1 million people who see the tower each year. And that's a lot, but it's not most people, right? Most people have not been to the Holocaust Museum. Most of you actually, right? I think it was like maybe a quarter, right? And as the museum has tried to move memorialization from inside the building to also something that's online on your phone that connects to students and kids, we've thought about ways to take this project that Yafa built, this memorial, she called it a memorial to life, not to death, something that showed the enormity of what had been lost, and try to find ways to make people pay attention to it again or more. If you read reviews of when the museum opened, there's lots of the Tower of Faces, right? And then it became sort of just this thing that was just there. And so how do we, as an institution who's trying to reach kids and trying to reach different audiences, take what Yafa built and connect with them? And I want to talk about a few different projects that have been trying to do this. The first one is in the exhibition space itself. I don't know that you can actually even spot here what I'm about to talk about, but if you looked very closely, you would actually see iPads mounted on the exhibition space. Let me see if I can point to one. I'll show you another picture in a second. Here. This is an augmented reality project. It's something the museum has done over the past several years. Here's a better picture. You can see the iPads maybe a little bit more clearly here. And the goal was to integrate something into the space, but not disrupt what we knew was already so powerful, right? So that's sort of why it takes you a second to see it. The tower exhibit is 2 stories. When you walk in it the first time, you have just gone through the set of the exhibit that talks about the Nazi rise to power and the exclusion and discrimination against Jews that took place mostly in Nazi Germany in the 30s. And this is sort of your first moment to meet the shtetl, to remember the people, to like step back from scale. And we found that visitors do that a great job there, right? That is a place that they sort of naturally would stop and pause and think, look at the photographs, and you could like watch people sort of make these connections. But the second time that you come to this exhibit is after you've gone through the next floor, after you've learned about ghettos and killing centers and mass shooting operations, after you've really been sort of overwhelmed with death. And we found that people just were walking through. The average visitor was spending less than 30 seconds in the tower on this floor, right? So that meant that they were not taking that moment to pause and to put that individual face on everything that they had just seen. So the goal of this augmented reality exhibit was to make people, not make them, of course, but to encourage them, right, to take this moment. So we added these iPads, and we found that now 51% of visitors stop and use them, which is an incredibly high number for any sort of public space. Did I get that statistic right? hold on. Now I don't want to have lied to you. Nope, let me see. Yes, that's right. Okay. They stop and explore farther. Some of them watch what is briefly a 30-second intro video that just sort of tells you who these people are and what happened to them. But that then most people actually do explore further. There are 30 individual stories where you take the iPad and essentially hold it up to a photograph, and it tells you about that photograph and about the person that's in it, who they were, what happened to them, anything that we know. Most of them are people we do know what happened to them. A lot of them have one person who survived, most who didn't. But a few of them, we also say that their fate is unknown. And to me, this is so important because we don't know exactly what happened to every single person. We can't. And I think reminding people of that is really important, that we can know their name, but not their fate. And sometimes we know someone's fate, but not their name, because this crime was so enormous, because it destroyed an entire community. And so today we know that over 500,000 visitors have picked up the iPad, and when they do, they spend about 2.5 minutes instead of less than 30 seconds in this space, and many of them explore about 2 to 3 photographs. So this is still for our visitors, right? It's more about enhancing the exhibition space, bringing new technology into our exhibition, updating it for the 21st century. If you've been before, you might have seen some very old TV screens from the 90s in the rest of the exhibit. So this is very cutting edge for us, at least. But we've also worked to do a lot of things online. There are a few videos that you could find to learn more about Asia Shock. One of them is a 44-minute video, which is part of our Stay Connected Live series, where basically a historian host interviews a guest and talks about a topic. In this case, our host Edna interviewed our photo collections curator about the tower as a whole, the exhibit, the story of Asia Shook, and Jaffa. 44 minutes is a big ask on the internet, right? That's a big ask for someone to watch. We've had about 200,000 views on Facebook and YouTube, which is also, I think, pretty good. And here's just a second image. When I'm done, I'll click out of my PowerPoint and I'll just show you a little bit of the video footage of the tower. So if you haven't been, you can picture it. We also then have made a shorter video that's 45 seconds compared to 45 minutes for the youths, right? That's 45 seconds is even still like kind of the max you're really going to get attention from somebody on their phone. You can probably tell by the format here that this is formatted for an iPhone or a smartphone. You can see it on TikTok, Instagram. It is on YouTube, so I can also, I'm just going to play this one for you because again, 45 seconds. And geared towards thinking about what are students interested in? What's going to catch a young person's attention? This is something we're still working on every day. Then we also have things for those of you who would be interested in a deep dive. This is a Holocaust Encyclopedia article, Asia Shook, the Annihilation of a Jewish Community. This is something I worked on. It's why this is the topic I'm here talking to you about today, is that I spent several months crafting this article to try to basically complement the exhibit space and all this work that we're doing virtually with the detailed information. This is definitely not for the student or the casual reader. It's very detailed and gives this sort of full picture. This is a media essay, which is a shorter introduction to what happened, and then a lot of photographs as well, because again, that's what we know draws people in. And it's one of the things that I think is most interesting about Jaffa Eliak and her memorial project, that it was based on photographs. One of the things that's so difficult is as we move into a world where we're all so visually on our phones, where everyone expects images of everything and video of everything. I think we find it easier actually to memorialize with a picture, with an image, with something to connect with. And Aisha Shook has given us that because of Yafa. She has given us that we can actually picture this community and know things about the people who lived there. But the third project, or last project I'm going to tell you about, is the opposite of pictures. It's a podcast. The museum's podcast is called 12 Years That Shook the World. We've had 3 seasons. In those seasons, each episode is a different story, isolated. And the 4th season, which hasn't even been announced yet, so you're getting the sneak peek, is about Aisha Shook, and it is 6 episodes all about Aisha Shook. And what's so interesting about that to me is, again, this is how people are consuming information now in their AirPods, right, in their headphones. But Aisha Shook has been a visual memorial, and podcasts are not, right? And one of the amazing things about the collection and collecting that Yafa Iliak did is that she also collected oral histories, testimonies from other survivors, multiple testimonies. And the podcast is going to follow 3 survivors: Miriam Kabachnik, who survived in hiding; Leon Kaganovich Khan, who survived both in hiding and as a partisan; and Zvi Mikolovsky, who actually survived the mass shooting itself and then survived in hiding and as a partisan. And it starts sort of, as I hope you'll see tomorrow, with the same thing I'm going to start with, which is the story of the town, the life, right? Like, who were these people? What did they do? How did they know each other? And you get to hear their voices. You get to hear the voices of our host and then a few historians. So if you listen, you'll get to hear me again talk a little bit more in a little bit more detail about these 3 survivors. And they're really very incredible people with really fascinating memories. They're sort of from 3 different social classes. Miriam's the only woman, but they're kind of all about the same age. And combined, they really give you this sort of beautiful connection to this town. And I'm really excited to see how people react to it, but then how also it can be paired with the visual. And so that through short videos, long videos, a podcast, an article, if you can't come to the museum, you can still memorialize Aisha Shook. If you are someone very casually interested, you can watch a 45-second video. If you're someone who really wants to know what happened, you can read, you can listen. You could decide to buy Yafa Iliak's 1,000-page book that she wrote called There Once Was a World. And these projects, many of them I've gotten the chance to work on, have been something that has been very meaningful to me. The museum has multiple aspects of its mission: education, memorialization, research. And most of the time I'm working on education, but Aisha Shook is always a chance to work on memorialization, to talk about how someone lived, what exactly happened to them. And I've tried not to do any of that actually tonight because it's what I'm doing tomorrow. So I hope most of you will be there and you'll get to hear a little bit more about Aisha Shook. But now I'm gonna just show you the videos briefly, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about this or really anything. So here, this is on mute on purpose. This is what the Tower of Faces looks like. And so now there are iPads there. All right, I realize this maybe isn't gonna be able to play its sound, and that's fine. Oh gosh, it sure did. you want me to play it again? I know it got fuzzy. Or are you happy with one time? One time is good. Okay. Then this is if you wanted to go online and see our media essay. I'm not showing this one tomorrow, but it's one of my favorites. Here where you can see this is the orchestra. It's actually both Jewish and non-Jewish. Poles and Jews played in the orchestra together, the fire departments. This was an actress in the town, and she owned a hotel. This one's always so remarkable to me, this bus stop. So the town didn't have running water, but it starts to be connected to the larger cities, Vilnius, by a bus route. There's a gas station. So it's one of a place that's starting to become a bit more modern. The bar mitzvah, the going away party. A lot of people began to emigrate from the town either to the United States or to mandatory Palestine. This one we'll talk about tomorrow. And there's Jaffa with the chickens. This is actually one of the last photograph taken. It was taken the day before the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union, and right before they arrived in Aishashuk. I think she's kind of brave. The chickens are a bit scary. And then this is not a museum creation, but there's even now a picture book, which is a pretty good introduction for an elementary school students into this history because it doesn't talk about the massacre. It focuses on Jaffa and the collecting of the images. All right, I'm going to stop there, and I welcome all questions. Yes?
The photos in the tower, are they prints or are they the original?
They're prints.
They're prints.
Yes.
So my other question was how do you protect them, like if they're the original, but those are probably stored.
Yes. And it was a big debate always about like when to reproduce an image, like what's a facsimile, what's not. They really were very careful about that. But these are also blown up so that some of them are like 3 feet tall even. So these are all reproduced. And a lot of people were can you imagine being asked to give up the photographs, right? So I think they did end up donating them to her and they're, I think at Yad Vashem in Israel. But that we have the copies. Yeah, and they've recently refurbished them because even the copies get damaged by light. Yeah.
How did Jaffa survive? How did Jaffa and her brother survive?
Jaffa, her brother, and actually initially her dad survived as well, and her mom and baby brother survived until the end of the war. They survived in hiding. Basically, it became sort of clear that something really bad was about to happen in Ishashuk. And the last minute, her father decided to send Jaffa and her brother to stay with their nanny, who was not Jewish. And then he sort of snuck out from the synagogue where they were being held, got his wife as well and their baby, and ended up going into hiding. It's a little bit more complicated than that because this was September 1941, and the Soviets don't retake Aishashuk until July of 1944. So that even if you've survived the initial massacre that took place there, you have to survive for 3 more years. And they found at first many people who were willing to help them, and then over time, less and less. It became more and more dangerous for them, essentially. They had to worry about being betrayed, found killed by not just the Nazis, but by collaborators in the region. Jaffa came from one of the wealthier families in town, and they had a lot of connections with non-Jews. So they had people to sort of call on, basically.
Did she stay with the nanny for 3 years?
No, they left the nanny, and eventually they actually went to a ghetto in a different town and lived there for several years about a year, until it became clear that there was going to be a massacre in the ghetto. And then they went into hiding again, but they were always sort of in and around the region of Aishashuk. I think they moved hiding places a few times as well.
They survived because of the connection, because they knew people that weren't Jewish in the area, whereas somebody who might not have known that would have perished.
Every survivor I know only did so with the help of non-Jews who they had some relationship with, who they had done business with, who knew their family, who for some reason were willing to take a big risk to help them. There are also stories of people who initially are being hidden by someone, who are then caught or turned in by the rescuer themselves or by a neighbor. So it was very dangerous to be hiding people. And they say sort of with rescue in general, right? It's never one person is never enough to rescue someone. It's 10, 15, 20 people who, even if only one person is hiding them, you need someone to get food or to look the other way or to sort of take them from one place to the other. And in Aishashuk, it's pretty clear that actually initially there are a lot of people who are willing to sort of help in that on that day. So I know I didn't really talk about what happened in Aishashuk, but there was basically one of the Nazi killing squads comes to town, tells everyone to go to the synagogue, keep them there. They keep them there for 3 days. And eventually they separate them. They massacred the men, and then they massacred the women and children. And they're in the middle of their town. They are all packed together in the synagogue. They're supposed to not be able to leave, but we know from the stories of people who survived that it was porous, that people are managing to sneak out and leave, to bribe the guards, to get help from a neighbor, because they're there for so long. And it's so clear that people in the town experienced this as a crisis moment. And so some people were anti-Semitic and cheered what was happening, but many other people were sympathetic at some level, right? These are people you've known your whole life being massacred within earshot. And that they were sort of willing to, you can come stay here for an hour, for a night, for a day. Miriam Kabachnik, who also survived, she's one of the 3 people we talk about in the podcast. She also survives in hiding, but at one point she's gone to somebody and asked for help, and they turn her down. She says, fine, I'll give you a bunch of goods from our home, right? And they say, okay. Another point, she goes and she's hidden by someone, and she realizes her family's stuff is there, right? So they've stolen her family's belongings, but they're also hiding her, at least temporarily. It's a very, very personal dynamic. And I think that's something we miss so much in some of our commemoration and understanding of the Holocaust, where there's a distance, we think, between the killers and the victims. But in Aishashuk, this became very, very, very intimate, right? People you've known your whole life are there and reacting to you in danger.
You're talking about the escape from the synagogue, other people help you. Let's say those some nice or good people. How many of those names do you collect? The people who assisted and helped.
Yes, so some of them we know their names as the survivors tell us them. So we know that Leon Kaganovich goes to a woman named Mrs. Karolova. Based on sort of knowledge of Polish, Karolova, what is actually her name, right? Or a lot of times people are very adamant about telling you the name of their rescuer. 2 of them have been honored as righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem. One of them is a farmer his name is Kazimierz Korkuch, and his helper, who is a shepherd, whose name I cannot pronounce. So we do know some of their names, but because Aishashuk changes hands a number of times, it was Poland, and then it's the Soviet Union, and then it's Lithuania, and then it's the Soviet Union again, and then it was Germany, and then it ends up that in the post-war period, when we're trying to collect information about Aishashuk, it is in communist Lithuania, and it is hard to get there and get information. Yaffa did go in the 80s back to town on a trip, as did several other survivors, I think in the 80s and 90s, to go return to town.
I'm generally interested in the mission And has that mission evolved over time?
Our mission is federally mandated by the act of Congress that created us. I have it in my slideshow even. Oh no, not my password. Okay. Um, so the mission has not changed. The context in which we carry out our mission does, I think, right? That in 1993, many people alive remembered World War II. We're very familiar with the context and the history and the story that we were telling. Everybody knew what the Soviet Union was. And now I would not even want to guess what percentage of visitors to the museum have ever heard of the Soviet Union. And so it's not that our mission has changed, but teaching people the history of the Holocaust looks very different in 2025 than it did in 1993. But the mission is set by law.
How does the town itself reckon with its own history? Do they talk about it? Do they talk about how they were mostly a Jewish town and then all the Jews were wiped out? Or is it kind of something that's not really talked about?
It's a really good question. And even over the course of the war, like many of the houses that had been there are destroyed. So some of the survivors come home and their house has already been dismantled. I don't think they reckon with it particularly. There are markers on the grave sites. I believe the synagogue became a sports complex at some point. Like if you look at, it's like the shtetl was so Jewish that once there are no Jews living there, you would just have a fully empty town. And so people who lived there fully repurposed it. In general, the Jewish population was better educated than the population that lived there before. I also actually don't know how much continuity there was because of the changing hands. At the time, sort of before the Holocaust, most of the people who lived in the town or around the town who were not Jewish were Polish Catholic. But then once it became part of Lithuania, I don't actually know whether they left. And so that whether there's been so much demographic turnover that there's not much connection left in the end. It's a place that's been through a lot of turmoil.
Are there any Jews living there now?
No, not to my knowledge. Yaffa always said it very concretely, there are no more Jews in Esheshak. I don't know if there's one, I don't know. But to my knowledge, no, there's no Jewish community there.
How many Jews survived?
29.
And how many people were there originally?
Jewish, probably 1,500 or 2,000. But really interestingly, about 500, as many as 500 survived the initial massacre. That it was such a clear crisis moment that many people didn't follow the instructions to go to the synagogue or to stay in the synagogue, that many people sort of fled and scattered into the countryside, but that then to survive another 3 years was almost impossible. So we know of 29 who did.
I understand that you're involved in the outreach into the Holocaust Museum in Cape Town and other places around the world. Is there a partnership? Is there some connection with these other museums?
We have relationships with most Holocaust organizations. In the United States, there is an organization called, its acronym is CHECK, but I'm not quite sure what they all stand for, which is local regional Holocaust organizations are all connected, and sometimes they come and do programs with us. There's also an Association of Holocaust Organizations, which is at the international level. There are other sort of broad international cohorts, essentially, of Holocaust organizations. And then we have personal relationships as well. We have a very good working relationship with Yad Vashem in Israel, and with some of the German memorial sites as well. I personally rely on a lot of other memorial sites quite often for their research. The Auschwitz Museum and Memorial does really incredible research there. And a lot of them have really amazing memorialization projects. For most countries, have something creative or meaningful or both that I use quite often. And so we have lots of those sort of personal connections, and then there are also more official ones. But I don't think we officially call any of them our partners because of whatever that means in federal government parlance. There's always a bureaucratic something going on, but yes.
I, I've always wondered about Adolf Hitler
Hmm.
and why, what was it in his childhood or youth or that made, create such an animosity, say, Jews? I know it was prevalent in Europe, but this one man put it all together, and I was wondering why, how did he do it, and where did it come from?
I wish I had a good answer, but I have been just serendipitously working on our Hitler biographical material and reading every historian's answer to this question, attempt to answer it. Right, the people who want to see it in his childhood, to see it as something psychological, or people who look to his young adulthood or his World War I experience. Because just as you said, we want to understand how one person could unleash so much destruction. My Lindsay answer is that it has to do with his experience of thinking of himself as a victim of life, right? That he doesn't get into art school, he never gets a good job, Germany loses World War I, the empire collapses, and that he sort of is constantly seeking and searching for an ideology to make it make sense. And for him, he drew on all of these anti-Semitic ideas and conspiracy theories and found in the German population people willing to agree with that. But I don't think there's one thing to point to. There's lots of theories out there. Most of the really salacious or interesting ones are disproven. So like there's the theory that Hitler's grandfather was Jewish. No. Or that his mother did die of cancer, and that her doctor was Jewish and that he blamed the doctor. But actually we know that he really respected the doctor, went to visit him, her doctor was Jewish, went to visit him, thanked him, and actually after the Nazi annexation of Austria, protected him. Allowed him to emigrate, right? Like exempted him from certain anti-Jewish policies and allowed him to emigrate.
How many Jews got that golden card? Like, how many?
I'm like,
Right,
just him?
Right, okay, I was like, that can't have been.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Nazis are rigid ideologues who make many, many exceptions constantly to everything always, but the only one that I know of that Hitler personally was involved in is the doctor.
You said 29 people survived
Mhm.
that town. How many people are alive today? Just the three?
I don't think any of them are alive today. So the interviews we have with them are from the 90s and maybe into the early 2000s. None of them, were alive to be interviewed. So that's one of the roles that they had the historians play, was to sort of study, learn, listen to that person and speak, not as them at all, but to their history, their story.
Given what's currently happening as far as, we're losing survivors. We're looking at, a point in time that's not too far off in the future where we're not gonna have any living survivors left. What does that mean for the museum, and how are you guys, trying to pivot and, still personal, to people, but, without that, this is a person who was there, who survived.
I think it's actually been something that has always been changing, that survivors who were alive in the 90s, many of them had survived camps. Then you have many who were child survivors who had survived in hiding. Most of the survivors who still volunteer now were either children who had been hidden, or we have a few who still volunteer who had been deported to Auschwitz from Hungary in the summer of 44 when they were about 13. So that means that they were born in, help me with math. Yeah, 31, 32. This is my Lindsay, not the museum hat, speaking right now. I personally am not a big fan of some of the technological stuff. I don't think that that's what speaking to a Holocaust survivor is about. I think to some extent it falls on us to bear witness of the relationships we had, of the stories that we heard. I think there's some really interesting ways to try to connect to kids. One of the projects I've worked on at the museum has been to read young adult books and find which ones do we think are historically accurate, because there are a lot of very inaccurate books out there, fiction and young adult things on the Holocaust, graphic novels, right? That trying to use the technology to bring the stories to people, but not use technology to change what we have. To me, that's what the augmented reality is, right? You're using the iPad to connect better with the photograph, but you're not changing the photograph. It's still just a photograph.
Just two things, when we've gone there, there's a room where you sit and you watch survivors give their stories.
Mm-hmm.
Has that changed over time? And people to it, and the second question is, I didn't realize that the museum was federally mandated.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you could speak a little bit to that, because I had no idea about that one.
Yes, the testimony film is still there and they have not changed it. It is the same as it was when it was opening. We are undergoing a major renovation of our main exhibit, or we will be soon. I would imagine more, not less, survivor testimony in the future. I think we have learned so much about the power of testimony and video. I don't know if it'll stay as a video at the end or not. That is above my pay grade, these big decisions. And as for the museum, is federally mandated. You're gonna really test my knowledge of museum history here, though. Let's see. The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum Council was created by Jimmy Carter in the 70s. That sounds right? He was in the 70s. Okay. Yes. And then there was a commission. Elie Wiesel was very involved. I'm really butchering the exact specifics of this, but in the end, the recommendation was to create a Holocaust Memorial Museum, and it opened in 1993. We are a hybrid institution. We are an independent government agency, but we are supported by both federal funds and donated funds.
Can the current government mess with it? No?
Probably. That seems to be the answer that I have, is probably.
Similar to the African American museum that they're taking out. No?
Yes, we're not in the Smithsonian, but we are similarly federal. So far, to my knowledge, we have received great support.
When was Yad Vashem created?
Yad Vashem was created in the 40s.
I saw that in the 80s.
I think very shortly after the founding of the State of Israel, Yad Vashem was created, and it absorbed actually several smaller organizations who had existed in Europe to collect, and archives that sort of what existed at smaller levels then became part of Yad Vashem.
All right, well, if you have any more questions, I'm sure Dr. MacNeill will be willing
Lindsay
to
is fine.
address them at our reception next door. Thank you all for coming to our presentation, and once again,
Thank you all.
And I invite you next door to our social hall for a reception. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you.